Hello, this is Abraham Kanz, Director of Conservation Research here at the Crane Trust, and I'm coming to you today to talk a little bit about our crane tracking project. So many of you may remember that this last spring, we started this donor-funded project to put trackers on Sandhill Cranes, and we've promised updates. We were able to do updates for a lot of the spring and whatnot, but once the cranes got far enough north into Canada and beyond that, as we'll see here shortly, we weren't able to receive the cell signals from their trackers anymore, though data was still being taken. Now, finally, that the cranes are starting to move back south, starting their southern migration, we are getting signals from them again, and we're able to update you on where they've been and where they are now. So I just wanted to walk you guys through all of this information, the data that we have posted online, and kind of talk a little bit about where the cranes have been, what they're doing, and some of the cool things you can see using the website that we provided for the Sandhill Crane Tracking. What I want to do first is give a little tutorial of how this system works as well. The bottom left of the screen right here, there's that little clock. If you ever want to bring it up, brings up the timeline for this map. You can see, well, the 5 trackers we have out are all associated with a different crane and a different color on here. And so you can see, it always takes a second to load, there's a lot of data points here. So sometimes this map can be a little slow moving in terms of its loading. But if you look at this, you can see that we were really fortunate in that when we placed trackers on cranes, we got cranes that nested in very different locations, right? So we have some of these, the green and the blue over here that are in more of the southern central part of Canada. Yellow here went a bit further up. And then, it's a little slow to move, there we go. We have the purple that got all the way up here into the Northwest Territories. And then red, this is an interesting one, it's actually a crane we tracked that made it all the way over to Russia, right? So it went across through Alaska here, all the way to a whole other continent. So really cool to see that we got one of the cranes that actually made that trip all the way over there. While tracking this crane that went over to Russia and projecting it in our program, ArcGIS Pro, there was actually an issue because this crane crosses the international date line, right? And so essentially, our programming, our software, was like, oh my gosh, we have a time-traveling crane because it went forward in data points, right? A new point, but that point was in the past, or a different, right, across the international date line. And so it was having trouble, the program itself was having trouble processing that. Kind of a fun little quirk we found of ArcGIS Pro. It took a little bit to work around that because it just did not want to show these data points in the correct way based on that swap over in date so rapidly occurring. Before I play the whole time lapse and talk about kind of their movement and whatnot, I did want to talk about some of the data interpretation and looking at these points. So you can see here, right, this is actually the return journey where my mouse is scrolling right now for the cranes, the kind of south of where their journey over to and through Alaska to Russia was. And you can see that we're missing data points here, right? There's just large gaps. You can notice some of those throughout even the other cranes data sets, and that just has to do with the charge on the trackers. The trackers are solar powered, but if they haven't gotten enough sunlight, if it was really cloudy for a lot of days in a row, or if, say for instance, there was a lot of wildfires in Alaska, a lot of that soot and ash in the air can really block sunlight and can make it difficult for the trackers to get the solar charge they require. So when all the charge has left these trackers, they do stop taking data points. And so you can see some gaps here because the tracker on this particular Sandhill crane just didn't have enough charge. And so it led to these large gaps. We expect that in the data. I mean, that's just the nature of tracking migratory species like this. You're going to lose some of the data just due to environmental conditions. That, however, is why we have multiple individuals. We plan to put out more trackers this year. And you can still kind of see the path that the crane took overall in order to get back, start making its way back for the fall migration this year. So the next thing I want to do is zoom out of the map here, and I'm just going to play through the timeline of movement for these cranes. So if I hit this button, and so as a side note, when you first hit this button, sometimes you want to rewind afterwards again because it takes a second for the map to essentially get rid of all those points and load back in at the beginning of these data points. And so you might have noticed that there was a bit of a stutter there on the map. So I've dragged it back all the way to March. This interval, this blue interval here, you can adjust it by stretching where I have this, either of the dots on either side of it to increase the interval. Right now, I have the interval set to 2 weeks. So it shows 2 weeks of tracking data for each crane at a time. In March, you can see that these cranes were right here in Nebraska. And so that's where we put the trackers on them. That's the beginning of the data set. And as we hit play, you can see, you can follow the migration, 2 weeks of dots. All right, and I'm gonna pause it right here. So you're able to see kind of that movement all the cranes went through in their migration. And now you'll see that the cranes remain at these particular points for multiple months, actually. And that's just because, I mean, that's their nesting grounds, right? So we got, as I said kind of earlier, a wide variety of nesting grounds in this data set, or cranes from a wide variety of nesting grounds, which is just really cool. Completely happenstance that we got cranes that went to completely different areas, you know? It's, we capture whatever cranes we can and put the trackers on them, so it's just really cool that it worked out that way. But you can see that these cranes, you know, remain in those areas for quite a while, and we hit play again, and you can start seeing their migrations back. You'll see the ones from southeastern Canada over here started making their way a bit sooner. This purple dot made a huge trek at the end of August, beginning of September, right? Yellow's working its way down, and then red, over here on the left, has made their way back into the United States, across, into Alaska. And then if we go, just that last little jump, oh, there we go. We'll go through the whole thing one more time, and I will pause it at the end. As you can see, that's where they're all hanging out for their nesting and their ending points. And this is pretty close to where they are right now. So we see that this red one, the red crane, is in Alberta currently, working its way south for the migration. We do have one that's already in North Dakota, really cool, doing some of that, their fall staging. And then we have 3 within southern Saskatchewan, right here, the blue, the green, and the purple. So really cool to see that these individuals are, you know, already making their way through their fall migration. They're doing their fall staging right now. And we'll continue to keep you updated on each of these individuals as they make their way, you know, further south, as they start moving again after they've done their fall staging. And we'll let you know when they're making their way through Nebraska. And then it'll be really cool because once they, you know, finish their fall migration, we'll actually begin getting data from where their wintering grounds are for each of these cranes, which we didn't get last year, right? Because we caught the cranes on their way back from the wintering grounds. So we actually don't have data for their wintering grounds yet, but we'll finally be getting some of that data this year. One other thing I wanted to show you all was actually just zooming in a bit more on this map. So you see the data points we currently have, but actually as you zoom in, it'll take a second to load, and I'm going to zoom here. But you can see that it gets more and more detailed, and it will actually load more and more points the closer you get. And as we zoom in on this individual in Ontario, you can get a really good sense of where they spent a bunch of their time during the nesting. During the nesting. Bunch of time during the summer, so their nesting grounds. And you can see just how many data points we have, right? As I continue zooming, there's actually thousands of data points we've collected already on each of these cranes. But you can see kind of the areas that it likes to spend its time in, right? And you can see that, you know, generally these individuals are hanging out near these, what we call like the prairie pothole region and whatnot. So near these lakes or ponds or little wet areas, right? These cranes really like their water. And so you can see this individual in Ontario spent a ton of time over here. If we zoom out again, we can go ahead and take a look at, I'm going to scroll all the way over to the one that went over to Russia, so we can get a little look at its nesting grounds. And you can see this individual actually spent, what's really cool, a lot of time on the coast right up here. And so, I mean, you can just see the sheer amount of data we have, and you can continue scrolling and get like really spatially explicit. All of these points, you know, we can put in a series based on time, and that's how we're going to look at it once we start analyzing this data actually. But you can see that this individual also took some trips, you know, to other areas here on the coast of Russia, and even took a little bit of a trip further south down here. So it's really cool to see this individual kind of, you know, have an expanded nesting ground and whatnot on a completely different continent. We have the accelerometers turned on for these trackers, so they actually track things like the speed at which the cranes are going at each individual time, and can also track directionality, things like that. And what's really cool is it also allows us to capture some of these really cool, the kettling behaviors you see cranes do, right? Like just up in the sky, sort of circling around, kind of riding air currents and stuff like that. And you can see it in these data points, these loop-de-loops right here. And if you follow the paths of the cranes, you know, this is the purple one, but I think you can find them on just about any of the paths. You know, you can typically find there's another big group of loop-de-loops all in a row. And you can just keep finding those. And it's just a really fun thing to see these cranes. You know, we can actually see the data points for that behavior and see what they're doing as they're moving along the landscape. So part of the reason that we're doing this, we're putting trackers on Sandhill cranes, is to look at the range at which they're foraging from the Platte River itself, right? So if we look at this, these are actually data points from last spring, right? So spring 2025. We're going to get some new spring data points next year. We'll get some data points this fall when they come through, though they may not spend as much time here. But you can really see, you know, these cranes spending a lot of time in the river here. And you can see certain areas where they like to just hang out in these fields and whatnot. What we're primarily interested in is how far are these cranes foraging from the river, right? So what's this distance? What's the average distance? You know, does time of year play a role in how far they're going? As well as sort of, are we seeing shifts in the migratory route, right? So are we seeing, it's been speculated a lot, and there's been some observations that the crane migration is shifting further and further east. And so this will allow us to kind of track that. And you can see some of that here. You know, we have this blue individual, spent a lot of time even east of Grand Island a little bit, along the river there, in some of the crop fields nearby, things like that. But yeah, so really this is going to give us a good way to estimate the range at which they're foraging, as well as where they're foraging and where they're spending their time, if there's shifts in that across the river, and just kind of informing us about what's going on overall with the Sandhill crane migration. While the data we have further north, you know, in their nesting grounds is really cool, and we'll likely try to do some analyses with that, looking at possibly, you know, habitat type or distributions, things like that. We are primarily interested in how they're spending their time while they're on the Platte River or around the Platte River. That's all I have for updates right now. If you want to talk to me about this project or anyone at the Crane Trust, feel free to contact us through our website. We'll continue to provide updates. We'll be updating this website about once weekly to provide new data points for where the cranes are, keeps you updated on their fall migration. And the last thing I want to say is a big thank you to volunteers, donors, everyone that's helped with this project or donated to it. It's really awesome that we can fund science this way. And I'm really excited to show you guys the progression of these cranes as they move through their fall migration. Thanks.